We have always used tools. It kind of defines us as a species. But in using them, we've had to learn how they work. We've had to learn their rules. It doesn't matter what tool we're talking about. It could be a paintbrush, it could be a musical instrument. We need to understand how they work and then learn how to use them. But over recent years, tools are beginning to adapt to us. They're beginning to learn us, which is a totally different type of relationship. Smart tools have been around for ages. Smart platforms, algorithms have been driving and shaping the digital stuff that we use. But AI is going to make digital tools endlessly shape-shifting. It's going to change how we use technology, full stop. Within that, there are huge benefits. For example, things will become easier to use, quicker to use, and also much more accessible. But what I'm interested in is how it changes us as a species, how it changes us as individuals when that shift takes place. Enough of the intro, let's dive in. Okay, so clearly a new tool, let's go back to that brush example, knows absolutely nothing about you. It's an inanimate object made out of wood, bristles, and a bit of metal and glue. So we need to learn how that brush works. We have to get to know its weight, how flexible the bristles are, how it moves across a canvas. We need to understand what that brush can offer us, and then adjust our hand movements and the way our brain interacts with our hand in order that we can get the most out of it. And eventually that brush will become an extension of us. And anyone who's ever carved some wood, or carved anything actually, will also know that a knife is a similar thing. So when you get a new knife, it feels strange, it feels unusual. You have to get to know its weight and its length. You need to get to know the edge of the blade, how the handle sits in your hand. So it's the same really for any traditional type of technology, any traditional type of tool. But within that relationship, there's something that I think is quite interesting, and that's that the tool does actually, over time, change a bit as well. It changes to meet the way that you use it. So a brush's bristles will start to bend and maybe sit in a certain way because of the way you use it across a canvas or a piece of paper, and a knife, the handle will get smooth in areas where you're grasping it, and also the blade as well, the edge of the blade will start to change depending on how you're using it, cutting through materials. And importantly, neither side comes out completely unchanged. It's the same as well for just, not necessarily creative tools, but things, technology that we use every day. Think about when you buy a new pair of shoes. When you first start wearing them, they feel uncomfortable, so we need to get used to how they feel attached to our feet. And over time, actually, those boots will adjust a little bit to accommodate us. They'll start to take on the shape of our foot, and the rubber will wear down on the bottom in certain ways depending on how we walk. So there's clearly a relationship in how we adapt to technology, and technology has adapted to us. And I kind of call it an adaptationship. I'm really sorry, but I do like sticking a couple of words together to make a new one. So yeah, it's a kind of adaptationship in the way that we relate to technology. But clearly, historically, the bias really has been on us. We're the ones that have had to do all of the heavy lifting. We've had to learn how to use that brush, musical instrument, chisel, hammer, learn to get used to those boots, but the bias is on us. For example, a piano doesn't move its keys around to accommodate the way that we might prefer to play a piano, and a pencil won't suddenly correct a line because we're going in the wrong direction. Long story short, the world effectively says to us, look, here's the rules, here's the tool, here's the physical tool. You need to learn how they work. You need to learn to adapt yourself around them to get the best out of them. And while that might be annoying to start with when you get a new brush or whatever tool it might be, and it takes a while to get used to it, it's a bit frustrating, but actually it's within that struggle with that new tool that skill develops. I tend to think of technology as being at its best when it's a kind of stepping stone. So it gets us to starting something that we want to do rather than doing the entire activity for us. So I'm going to go back to the example of shoes, because I think it's an obvious example we can all understand, but shoes remove barriers to walking and running. Now, you can walk and run, obviously, without shoes, but in the highly urbanized concrete and tarmac environments we now live in, I wouldn't advise it because it's not very good for your feet, for your legs, for your muscles. So they create this stepping stone towards the activities of walking or running. But once they've done that, they kind of sit on the sidelines and then you take over. You've still got to deal with gradients, hills and things. Your muscles have got to work. You've got to face the weather. You're challenged with gravity, which is pushing down on you all the time. So there's plenty of struggle beyond the first step that technology has solved. And it's within that struggle that I think there's something really important that changes us, because we're fighting against resistance. We're fighting against the physical world or the complexity of a task. And it changes us both in terms of, if it's running, it builds our muscles, but also it teaches us about striving through barriers, like, pushing past difficult scenarios. And I think that's so important because that's something that technology, as it improves, begins to take away. Now, creativity works in a similar way. So if you can visualize an image in your mind and you want to bring it into life, traditionally, you'd have to drawn it or painted it. And then that means you've got to learn how to draw and how to paint. The same is true with photography. With a traditional film camera, you'd have to learn about aperture and focusing and film speeds and all that kind of thing. And then with music, you might have in your mind this idea of an amazing tune, but in order to get that tune out into the world, you'd either have to learn to write music or play an instrument, which takes time, it takes practice. And all this created a gap between our intentions, what we want to do, and our ability to actually do them. So over time, learning how to use those tools slowly closed that gap until we could visualize something, imagine something, and then bring it into the world through the display of skill, through the use of learned skills. And throughout that process, along the way, you develop judgment, patience, taste, and also a sensitivity to the process. You start to learn about what is required to get from A to B, or A all the way to Z. Not only that, but within that process, you'd make mistakes, and mistakes matter a lot more than we think, especially in creativity. So a slipped brush or a photo that's a bit overexposed or underexposed or whatever, you might be carving wood and the grain is a certain way so it splits and you kind of have to work around that. Those mistakes are sort of part authors in the final creation. So traditional tools and materials have always pushed back in unexpected ways, and then unexpected things emerge from that process. Now, digital technology has already started changing this relationship. It has been for a number of years. So software remembers us, algorithms start to learn about us and adapt things based on what they learn about us, and interfaces anticipate us. So increasingly, the tool has started to learn the human as opposed to the human learning the tool. And all that is interesting enough to me because I'm really curious about how that changes us as people. But with the advent of AI, was AI entering the scene and promising really to take over so much of how we interact with and use technology in the years to come, I think it's going to change our relationship with tech so much more. The reason why I think AI is going to change things so much is that it can interpret our intention and not just our commands. And that's a totally different type of technology. Previously, throughout history, an idea might sit in our heads, but then it had to pass through multiple barriers such as skill, technique, knowledge, and time before that idea could come into the world. So painting required painting skills. We had to learn how to paint. Music required musical skills. We might have to spend years learning how to play something like the violin before we could get that tune we've got in our head out and play it on an instrument. But AI has the potential and is already starting to close much of that gap. Today we can describe what we want, and then technology sort of moves towards us, shapes around us, and gives us what we want. We don't need to learn a skill anymore to create an amazing illustration or a really good piece of music. Now that is genuinely powerful on such a range of levels, but especially for accessibility, because there are people with disabilities who previously would have been locked out from expressing themselves creatively. They would have creative ideas in their minds, but their bodies may have not allowed them to learn something like the violin or to paint with a brush using their hands. But AI, being able to just talk to AI and describe what it is you want, removes those barriers completely, which is a great thing. In that sense, I see technology as being a bit like an elevator where it can lift us up past what can often be frustrating and pointless barriers. So that's a really good thing, and I think it's impossible, at least for me, to see that as being anything other than positive. But the problem is that elevator of technology can carry on going forever. AI can help come up with an idea, choose an idea, make the actual work, judge the work, improve the work. And at some point, the human can actually stop participating. Now, for purely commercial reasons, when you need to get an image made and put onto a website or posted on social media really, really quickly, then obviously that's a good thing. But it's not as rewarding for people making stuff in that way. It's not as helpful for our brains and our cognition to continually just ask for something and then it's delivered. To use an analogy, think about a mountain. Now you could climb potentially to the top of that summit, or you could just hop on a helicopter and it will take you right there. Now the view from that summit is going to be no less amazing whether you've climbed up there over the course of 12 hours or whether you've got a helicopter up there. But the journey there is really different, and we shouldn't pretend that both things are the same. The helicopter gives access, but climbing creates an experience that will change us, sits with us, molds us as people. And bringing that back to creativity, output and capability are not the same thing. AI has let us separate results from the process that used to create that ability in the first place. Now, at the moment, we're sort of transitioning into this. So clearly people are using AI. I use AI to create images for the videos on Layered Future, and I use it as a time-saving thing. I'm an illustrator. I'd love to spend ages creating individual illustrations for my videos, but I frankly haven't got the time. So AI really helps with that. It's a transitionary stage. Everyone's learning how these tools are adapting and how we can adapt to use them, how we should use them, how we shouldn't use them. But my fear is it's creating a kind of technological zero gravity where it's removing the resistance from doing anything at all. And my question would be, what does that weaken in the process? Now, if you look at, to use the analogy of gravity again, if you look at astronauts going into space, you'll see what happens to their muscles after spending 6 months on the International Space Station. They come back and their muscles have wasted, whatever it is, a third away in that time. And my fear is that the same thing happens if we start leaning too heavily on AI to create everything for us just based on prompts. Then we start to lose the ability, that sort of muscle strength in our minds to create things ourselves. AI is especially significant as a technology because it can think for us. There hasn't been a technology before that's been able to take on the job of thinking. And when you reflect on it, thinking is us. Thinking makes us who we are. So if we start using AI, not just to make things, but to say, instead of, oh, here's my idea, give me some advice on it, to come up with an idea for me, well, I think that's a really dangerous area, because instead of challenging our judgment, it starts to replace our judgment. And that is something different entirely. Now, all of this wouldn't be a problem if there was a clear visual red line that we knew that once we crossed it, we were outsourcing all of our agency and our creativity to AI, but it doesn't work like that. In fact, I think we won't notice. I think we're not noticing sometimes when it happens, because I think it feels like convenience, and so we just lean into it, and we will continue to lean into it. Each small step on that journey seems reasonable. It is reasonable to choose AI to take on a task because it will save us time. But when you combine everything together, if you're using it for coming up with ideas, selecting ideas, refining ideas, producing the outcome, then authorship basically disappears completely. Look, this isn't an argument against adaptive technology or AI, because I use it, so why would I argue against it? I think that adaptive technologies, tools that learn about us, learn how we want to create things and adapt to us, can be really, really useful. And a lot of the time, they remove pointless barriers in our progress. And as I said earlier, really importantly, they increase accessibility for people that otherwise might not be able to create things. But removing all struggle from the act of creativity isn't a good thing. As I said, I think technology is best when it's used as a stepping stone, something that gets us to the starting line so we can run the race, but not actually running the race for us. The thing is that AI is changing the old relationship we had with technology by removing resistance, or at least giving us the option to remove all resistance. And I think that's a really important change that we should all be reflecting on. Because the thing is, we can still choose to draw, we can choose to write, we can choose to learn an instrument, we can choose to climb that mountain whenever we want. The problem is there's an army of technology standing around us now that's kind of nudging us not to do that. But challenge and difficulty are important. Difficulty isn't automatically valuable, but some struggle does change us. It changes us in really beneficial ways. I wonder if the most important skill in the future will be knowing when not to lean into technology, when not to lean on AI to do everything for us, instead of being a kind of super AI user, someone who can really control it and use it to the best effect. I think it's highly likely that AI is going to become the interface to almost every piece of technology in the digital landscape, at least. We won't be having smartphones. Their days are numbered already. We're going to have augmented glasses. We'll be able to talk to our AIs, direct them, control things remotely just with our voice. And because of that, it's inevitable that technology is going to increasingly reshape itself around us. When we're just talking to technology, we don't have to cope with the interface problems that we've had to in the past. So as technology has the ability to reshape itself around us, we need to start questioning how much we want to reshape ourselves around the world, because that's a really traditional human instinct, a traditional human method of coping with reality. The important thing is that the AI elevator, the technological elevator, can go all the way to the top, and it will go all the way to the top when you let it. So our job really is deciding which floor to step off at, having the confidence to step off at a floor that still allows us those challenges and those struggles so that we can come up with amazing creative outcomes and still mold and shape ourselves in that process. Anyway, thank you so much for listening to my thoughts about this and watching this video. I hope it's at least given you something to think about. I look forward to seeing you again in the future.